Mohan, a Partition story. My name is Mohan Mojani, and when Partition happened, I was just 11 years old. And although it is not a story I hear told very often anymore, mine is just one in 12 million. It was spring when we heard the news. People had huddled round radios. Uncles and aunties whispered of it. Others spoke louder. India was going to have its independence. We celebrated, but we did not know that independence meant for us in Sindh that as Hindus we were going to have to leave. Nobody thought it seriously at first. Time passed, and it seemed that we would be able to stay. Why wouldn't we be able to stay? Leaders of political parties said that we were going to stay. The British would go, the Muslim League would rule Pakistan, and Congress in India. But then the violence spread. It spread like fire and swiftly consumed all of northern India. In Sindh it was not too bad, but still, we were going to have to go. When we shut the gates, we meant to open them once more. We never would. I do not remember Sindh well, but it was home. It was there I played gilli duna with friends. It was there that I learned so much about the world. And it was there that I left with my mother, my brother and my sister, and we would go south to Delhi to live with my other brothers who had already made careers there. That was the plan. We stopped in Kaipur, the nearest town to us. We stayed with an uncle and auntie, and we ate subji with chapatis. And we waited until the next morning. The summer sun was already hot as we walked to the train station. I was sweating and confused. I didn't really understand. Nobody did. Why did independence mean that we had to leave our home? My mother had explained that it was not safe, but I'd seen no evidence of this. We boarded the train that was to take us over the border, even though there was no border yet. That would not be announced until 3 days after partition officially happened. And some of you may have been to India. Much has changed since 1947, but if there's one thing that hasn't, trains do not leave on time, and ours was no different. We waited, and we waited, and we waited with a large group of Sikh men who were hot and sweaty, and the carriage began to smell. I just wanted to leave, to feel wind coming through the windows. I was quite excited. It's not like I got to go on trains often. Then the men were nervous, anxious, as we heard shouting coming from far away, and it grew nearer and louder, Thunderously it built into a tumult. A large group of Muslim men surrounded our carriage. They shouted horrible things, began to rock the carriage from side to side, said they were going to kill us. I wish I could tell you that I knew then that Hindus and Sikhs were responsible for the murders of as many Muslims as Muslims were Hindus and Sikhs, and that there was no right or wrong or good or bad in partition, only suffering and sorrow on all sides. I wish I could tell you that millions of people did not die in those years. I wish I could tell you that families were not divided. But I was just 11 years old, and all I knew is that my mother had placed my brother, my sister onto her shoulders, and she was telling me and my brother to run. So we did. Somehow we slipped under the men's legs, and we ran as fast as we could, hand in hand, and we ran and sprinted, and we ran so quickly and sweat poured off my brow and down my back, and I was breathing so heavily, and I ran further than I ever have, so far that the station was out of sight. My brother's hand was no longer in mine. I made it back to the town, and there I was taken in once again by my aunt and uncle. They must have known that my mother would come looking for me there. But when they told me to stay in at night and not to go out looking for her, I couldn't understand. So I slipped out of the window into the darkness. I wanted to get back to the train station, and so I retraced my steps, following what I thought was the right path, but in the dark it was hard to tell. Eventually I came across a man, a Hindu man. My mother had told me that I could trust Hindus. "Uncle," I said, "will you help me? I am lost. I do not know the way to the station." The man said he would show me. He took me by the hand, hard, and he started to lead me away from the path, away from the lights of the city. It became darker, and I really felt like I knew in my bones that something wasn't right. And when I said, "Uncle, I don't think this is the way," he gripped my hand harder, so hard that it hurt. And I tried to struggle, but he held my hand. But eventually I broke free, and he dived for me, hurling curses as he did, and I managed to duck away and sprinted off. And I ran quicker than I've ever run, quicker than I did before. And he was gone, faded into that same darkness. And I was more lost than I ever had been. I didn't know the way to the city nor the station. I just was alone in the night. No stars, just cloud. I wandered, waiting for the dawn. But dawn was not a beautiful sunrise. It was a slowly fading mist, thick, so thick I could barely see in front of my face. And all that meant was darkness turned into a pale grey world. And in that world, I wept. Tears streamed down my cheeks, and they stung my skin with salt. But I couldn't help but weep. I was lost. What if I never saw her again? My brothers and my sisters. I cried out for her, and no reply came. "Mother." Nothing. I don't know why I did it. I started to run. I ran and with those salty tears running down my cheeks. And I cried out, Nothing. Until I heard a voice. Mohan! Mohan, is that you? I ran towards it as fast as I could, more quickly than ever before, and out of the mist appeared, in silhouette, a horse and a cart. My mother, my brother and my sister were there, safe. I crashed into her arms, and she held me tight. Oh, Mohan, I thought I'd lost you. And I wept and wept. We boarded the train. The men had not meant to kill us, only scare us, my mother told us. And she would later tell me that in that mist, she did not know it was me she saw running. She just saw a shape and prayed that it was. And luckily, she was right. From that day, I've always felt like someone or something's been looking out for me. My name is Mohan Mojani. And although it is a story I do not hear told very often anymore, when partition happened, I was just 11 years old. And my story is just 1 in 12 million. Mohan, a partition story, part 2. We ended up over the border in Gujarat, where we stayed in a camp for many weeks. It had been set up for people like us, refugees we were being called. We'd only ever been Sindhis before. People were kind there, and I did as much as I could to be kind too. It seemed only right. I worked in a kitchen and helped as much as possible. And eventually from there we walked for many, many miles, in lines of people that stretched for tens of miles. We walked for a long time. We took more trains. I don't remember it well, but once we came off a train and a group of Sikhs took their swords out and they just started stabbing. I don't think they knew who they were stabbing. They just did. You try to forget these things, but they are scars on the brain. Just like when we finally did make it to Delhi. We were crossing the river, the Jumna, and as we crossed, a smell hit me. Like someone had thrown something at my nose. And I just had to see where it was coming from. I knew it was coming from the river. And my mother told me not to look over the bridge, but I did. And I saw bodies, Muslim bodies, floating down the river. It was choked full of corpses. And it was then I think I realised that there were no good and bad people in partition, only people. We stayed in Delhi. My brother had a job as an engineer, and my mother worked hard. She made us all breakfast in the morning, chapatis. She would get up at 5, and then she would sell bracelets and bangles at markets. And between them, she and my brother paid for my next eldest brother to go to university. And the same process happened time and again. I was one of many, the youngest boy. So my time took a while to come. And when it was time for my brother to pay for my education, I didn't want it. My elder brother, he was controlling, difficult. So I didn't go to university. I like to say I'd already been at the University of Life, a silly thing, but I say it all the same. I got a job as an engineer on the railways. And I travelled all over, a backpack on my back. I saw sunrises and sunsets. I travelled the country. It's beautiful. Down to Kerala, where the mountain forests are thick. I went as far north as the Himalayas. I lived for some time in Agra, on the other side of the river. If you ever visit the Taj Mahal, you must go. You must go to the Taj Mahal. It's the only thing worth seeing, really. And go round the back, and there is a river. You will see it. And on the other side of the river I lived. That's where we lived, the people of Agra. And I would drive around on a little scooter. I loved it. I even saw the Queen of Britain once. Would you believe it? She was 10 meters from me. I took a photo. I still have that photo. The Queen of Britain. The Queen. Me. Maybe Britain was a place that I should go. I thought more of it. I thought of my hero, Gandhi. And I thought that perhaps if I was to change the stars of those I loved, the family I would hopefully have, they would need a good education. If there is one thing my mother had given us, it was a good education. She insisted on it. The house we had, you see, in Delhi, outside of it was a street lamp. And whenever there was a power cut, which was often, we would be sent outside to read by the light of the gas lamp. She did that for all of us. Even though girls in those days could not get an education in India, unless you were very wealthy, she found a way to teach them. And we would teach too. Mira was her name. I am forever in her debt. And so I thought I would learn from her on education. And at this time, there were calls going out. Calls to come and help mend the country of Britain for its citizens like us, ex-Commonwealth members or Commonwealth members, ex-colonies, to go and live there. Your boat would be paid for. I thought of it. I found a wife. It was arranged for us by our parents. We met once. Her name was Renu. And she seemed lovely. She lived in Mumbai and liked going to the cinema and going for coffee and chai with her friends. We were married. And 3 weeks later, I set off for the UK. She would follow me in 3 months. I took a boat, and it sailed across the Indian Ocean and through the Great Canal that connects Africa and Europe. And there we stopped in Egypt, and I was only allowed to go with £3, would you believe? And in Egypt there was a man who wanted to see the pyramids. He was so desperate, I befriended him on this boat. But he did not have the money. And I believed then, as much as I do now, if you are kind with money, it will be kind to you. And so I lent him £2. And he went to see the pyramids. And he promised he would pay me back as soon as he could. So I came to the United Kingdom on a boat from India with £1 in my pocket. A friend had arranged for me already to stay with them, and they got me a job working in a hotel kitchen. Not long after, Renu joined. She did not take to Britain well. When she arrived, it was the dead of winter. It was freezing. And she asked if we would take a taxi from the airport to our flat. And I said, we can take a taxi, but I would rather buy you a coat and take the bus. It would be a hard adjustment for her. It was a hard adjustment for me. People were not always so welcoming. The invitation had not necessarily been one that was sent by everyone. Many pubs and restaurants, shops, held signs saying no blacks, dogs, or Irish. People may call us brown today, but I can assure you back then we were very much seen as black. Of colour, not white, that was all that mattered. We didn't look like we belonged there, and we didn't. Some were kind, of course. I worked hard. I moved to a Wimpy Burger and worked in the kitchen there. I looked after the tills, and it was run by a Jewish man. And we used to joke that Jews and Sindhis were the same because we had lost our homeland. He asked me to run the store when he took over a new one. I said no. I'd made enough money to go to night school. I learned English. And I trained as an engineer. And when I got my qualification, I got a job. Not long after having the job, a man would take over the company. He would sit me down and tell me that because of the colour of my skin, I would no longer be working with them. Mohan, Part 3. Eventually, I got a job at British Telecom, BT, still owned by the government then. And I would end up leading a team eventually. Would you believe it? Leading a team. And I designed the port which connects the cable for your phone, the little one that slides up. Well, I was part of the team and leading it that designed that port. I still tell everyone with pride whenever I know that they might be interested. My little part, my little contribution to the world. In 1969, Renu and I had our first child. He would be our only child, Mukesh. I loved him more than anything I have ever known. I worked twice as hard just for him. Renu worked as a bookkeeper, taking accounts. She was brilliant at it. Never lost a penny, she did. Time went by, and things got better in the country. A law was passed so men could not do what they had done before and fire me because of the colour of my skin. Mukesh got older. I would take him as often as I could to learn of his heritage. Anything that the British Museum would do about India, I was there in a heartbeat. There were Bollywood films coming into British cinema now. I took him to all of them. I could not teach him Sindhi or Hindi though. Children growing up with Indian accents then, they were subjected to horrific abuse for the way they sounded. I knew he would already receive abuse for the way he looked, and so I only really spoke to him in English. It broke my heart to do so. He got older and went to school. And we grew as a family. Well, we grew up. As he got older, we moved around London. One day, he would walk down the street and be egged, just for being brown. I wish he had never come to experience the things I did when we moved in to this country, but he did. I remember often when me and Renu would go flat hunting in the early days, we would the door would be open to us only to be slammed shut. Coloureds may not apply, or need not apply. They were not easy times, but eventually, in my 50s, I retired. People told me I was mad, but I retired and I became something I always thought I should be. Very excitingly, I became a financial advisor, and I helped people with their money, and I loved it. I loved trying to help. I think I was good with money, and they seemed to trust me. I would never tell them to do anything, only recommend, and they kept coming back. I did it until very recently. I have a house now. I am very much retired, as is Renu. Mukesh has grown up and has children of his own. And so much has changed since those early days that I find myself thinking of them often now. They are not stories I get to hear very much, and yet there are so many people who look just like me, who are my age, who must have the same sort of story to tell. There are people who do not look like me, from West Africa and the Caribbean, who I know must have similar stories. There are those who still say and do racist things. There are stupid politicians saying stupid things. Bloody idiots, I like to call them. My name is Mohan Morjani. When Partition happened, I was just 11 years old. It led me to leave my homeland for a new country, where I struggled to fit and made hard choices. But I like to think fit I eventually did. And I see my grandchildren living happily and well, living the lives they want. And I hope in some small way I have been part of that happening. Although my story is not one I hear told very often anymore, it is just one in tens of millions. Thank you for listening.